So in our sales trust within the database, for some of you who are on the call, you might not be yet using the trust. So this will be an overview of how that works. For others of you, you will have migrated and obviously will be up and running or have just started using the trust in the database. So we're going to just come down on the left-hand side here in the first instance, and a couple of settings that you need to be aware of is in your settings and the user management. As per most sales trust and trust programs, this is not going to be an area that is available to everyone in your database. So what you're going to do is you're going to come in and you're going to give those permissions to the relevant staff in your office. So where you will see that will be living in here under the property security levels. And you're obviously going to be able to give people access to see the trust ledger, and you're also going to be able to give them the ability to generate the ABA BPay files. Now, just on this latter one here, this is probably going to be one that is even more restricted, and that typically most offices will not have everyone in the office able to do the payments and create the ABA files. So let's just say you've got 4 people who potentially can receipt and disburse monies. You might only in that instance have 1 or 2 people that are actually able to generate the ABA BPay file. So for those officers who are online from New South Wales, this is also where you can lock that down to make it very compliant with the legislation in your state, where it's only licensed 1 holders in that office that are allowed to do the disbursements. So this just puts another level on it and allows you to lock that down, so only the respective people are generating those files in the database. Just while we're in this section as well, which obviously relates to the sales trust piece, is you can lock down here who can update the details on your property records to say that they're a sale, do the settlement payouts, and obviously have the access to the financial section. So this bit here all plays into that trust account piece that we're going to go through. The bank details piece on a property card can actually be made available to all staff within the office, because that is simply a collection screen where you're noting or collecting the details around the client's bank account details. So that is able to be turned on for, you know, just sort of general staff in the office. So they're the 2 key pieces that relate to the sales trust, or the key pieces around in the user permission screen. So if I scroll back up here now to the setup, which lives under the financials. So for any of you who've recently migrated, if you haven't been in here to the setup configuration screen yet, please pop in and just make sure that this has got all of the correct details. Now, I can 100% confirm that they will have all come across from my desktop. And for some of the offices where you've had 2 separate trusts sitting in place for cross-border transactions, where you've got to have some money in, for example, the trust accounts in New South Wales versus ACT or Victoria or Queensland, your databases will now be amalgamated into the one where applicable, and you will obviously have 2 trust accounts here. So some of you might have trust account, you know, NSW, sorry, and then you'll have a second one underneath that might be saying ACT. Now, with the VaultRE database, there is no restriction on the number of trust accounts that you can have in play. So for any offices where they may be transitioning business owners, so you'll have an old trust and a new trust, this is where you will see those sitting in here as well. With your receipt numbers, don't freak out for those of you who have migrated, where you can see that it is starting receipt 1. That is standard setting for all of our offices that have migrated from my desktop, where they already were using the trust account, but your receipt numbers will incrementally keep moving forward based on whatever number you were sitting at in my desktop. General accounts, this is something that some offices had not entered or had not set up in my desktop. So you do need to come in here, make sure you've got your general account details in the database, so that when you're doing payouts, you can obviously choose which account it is being paid into. Now, same thing in here. So just disregard the PM piece in there, because in my database, I've actually got a property management module turned on as well. So for the majority of you, that won't be in play. It'll be purely monthly sales. So in this instance here, we've got two general accounts, because when we're paying money out of our trust account, we're paying some money into our normal general, and then we have a separate general account which is primarily used or solely used for advertising money. So you can see here I've got them both set up, so when I do those payouts, I can choose the applicable general account I'm going to be paying out. We've got our invoice settings here for sales. So while this is not purely sales trust per se, this is where you're going to have the trust account noted here, and you're going to have the licensee details for each of these. And this actually relates to the invoicing that is going to, and the headings that are going to go out on invoices, where it's referencing these details, and also your sales trust receipts. So this is where it's pulling that information from, and obviously we've got some basic details down here. This is where you're going to set up your invoice numbering for your advertising if you haven't been using that previously. Now, we've got a brand new tab that has come into the database literally in the last 24 hours. And this is so that officers can come in and they can set up the footers that are to be applied to the various invoices coming in out from the database. So that is just a matter of coming in and creating an invoice, a footer. You're giving it a footer name, you're putting the details in here, and what you're doing is you're saying, is this applicable footer for agent advertising or for owner advertising invoices? Now, some of you may be wondering why there's multiple options here. And this is because, for example, if you've got two trust accounts, your cross-border scenario, this is where you'll have different invoice footers going out for your New South Wales VPA advertising versus your ACT advertising or Victoria advertising. And similarly for invoicing you might be doing for salespeople, if you're wanting that to go into a different account, that's where you'll obviously have that option. So once again, there's no restrictions in here. You just simply come in, you create your footers, and you note which ones it's applicable for. So if I had a particular footer in here, I'd have that set up, and then I can say apply this footer here for owner advertising. And obviously you can see here, I've just got this one noted. I've just called it New South Wales, so that when I'm applying those footers, I know which one it is that I need to choose. We've got our email template in this section here. This is the email that gets applied as a default when you send out your sales trust receipts. So you may recall in My Desktop that you didn't have an option to set a template at an office level. You just had the generic My Desktop one, and you would have to edit it an individual time. This is where you can now come in, you can create your generic email template response that is going to go with each of those email receipts that go out. Now, that doesn't stop you from editing them individually at the time. This is, as I said, just a generic one that is available there. This is obviously also where you can create your deductions, which is more to do with the processing of the sales. I'm not going to touch on that piece so much today. And obviously you've got your advertising expenses and your advertising schedules. Now, if you were using these components in My Desktop, they're all going to come across for you. And some of you may have cleaned them prior to migration. Some of you may have waited until you've migrated, and now you can come in and tidy these up. Now, something just to keep in mind here, if you come in and change any of the pricing on any of the items that you might have in here, that's not going to change any of the costs that are already applied across the database. It will only be on the costs that are added moving forward. So it's not going to sort of retrospect and change those costs on you. So you'll obviously have them all sitting in here, and then they become available in the system. Now, one of the ones that we are starting to set up a bit more as standard in a lot of offices is VPA reimbursement. We've just called it in our database, but this is the likes of the campaign agent and the sort of afterpay services that are being offered and provided to vendors around the advertising component. So that's where those third parties will essentially pay the money into your trust or pay it at settlement, and this just allows you to note that on the advertising ledger at the time. Okay, so trust reconciliation. I'm going to come down in this part of the program here, so I can't speak properly today. So this is where obviously I can see all my trust accounts that I've got in my particular database. You can see here that I've actually got these trust accounts that are in play. I've been reconciling them through the month. So same process as previously in my desktop. We recommend that you go in and reconcile as a minimum once a week. And ideally, most of you will be doing that every day or every sort of second day, depending on the size of your business and how much volume is going through your sales trust. So to resume the reconciliation, all I'm doing is I'm clicking on that button because obviously I've been reconciling previously during the month. And what you will see here, I'm just going to move this toolbar out of the way so I can see the bottom of my screen. You'll see here, all I'm going to do is I'm going to come in and change the bank balance amount and the date. So essentially the last time I balanced or reconciled was to the 18th of August. So if I want to reconcile up now to the 20th, which I'm just going to do for training purposes, and then I'm obviously going to just change the bank balance that is now showing on my bank statement. I'm going to pop that in and I'm going to go update. Now, the reason I'm showing you this is sometimes people come in here post-migration and they freak out because they'll do their first reconciliation and they'll be fine. And then the next time they come in, they'll go, all of my transactions from the 18th through to the 20th, none of them are showing. Vault's lost all my transactions. How am I going to reconcile? It's normally not the case. Normally all that's happened is the person or the office has come in, they've scrolled down, they've seen the unreconciled items from last time that they didn't tick off, and they simply haven't changed the date and the balance. So as soon as you change that bank balance amount and the date, the system is then going to show you the transactions in that date range you've now selected. So prior to me changing it to the 20th, none of these transactions would have been showing here. They would have only been showing up to the 18th. So what it's doing here is it's simply pulling through any of the unreconciled items from my last reconciliation, plus any new transactions I have now done in the database. So all I'm doing now is I'm going through and ticking those items off, and obviously you will tick it off until such point in time as you get the difference of 0. That essentially means that you've balanced for the day, and then what I can do is I can come away just to show you what that does, and then I will come back into my financials and come back into the trust reconciliation, click on that one again to resume it. And what you'll see now is the items that I've just ticked off are no longer showing there as ticked. So this is one of the main differences between the old and the new platform, is that as you reconcile those items off and as you get to, if you like, your temporary save state where you've got a 0 balance, the system then compartmentalizes those and essentially hides them from view, so that every time when you come back into the system, you don't have to scroll through the ones that you've already ticked off previously. So that is just this little button at the top where it's, as a default, it's hiding the previously ticked items that you've reconciled to where you would have balanced to a 0 balance. So now I can come in and I can obviously keep ticking the items off here. What you'll see here, same thing, you can print your transactions, same item with the journal entry. It's a plus and a minus here, so it's a double-sided entry. They've changed the language around this a little bit just to make it easy for people when they first put it in, so they don't have to sort of guess, is it a credit or a debit? They've just changed that to say it's a deposit or a withdrawal. But once you create that journal entry, it's always going to create the second side of it. So you can't create a one-sided journal entry. And at the end of each month, what you're going to do, the only difference is you're going to do the reconcile now, and then that will lock away all of the transactions, create the reconciliation reports and close it until it's ready for you to reconcile for the next start the reconciliation process for the next month. So looking for past reconciliations, this will simply live under the past reconciliations button. You'll have your different trust accounts sitting in here, and you can go in and choose any date range that you want. It will go as far back as the trust account has been in place in my desktop for those of you who have migrated. and you would then see all of the previous reconciliations. What I can then do is I can click on those, I can see the different reports, I can view and print all, or I can just look at particular items here. Now, if I look at the reconciled trust payments, you can see here that I've just got a transfer and a double-sided journal, but you would see all of the bits and pieces showing in there. You have all your trust reports, you've got your bank deposits, your cash book payments, receipts, deposits due. So this is where you can come in, you can sort it by address, under offer, unconditional settlement, etc. You can put in a date range and then just refresh it. And what it's doing is it's showing you the property address, the current status, expected settlement date, when your deposit is due to be paid in full by, the amount and how much you've received to date. And obviously you can click straight through onto the respective report, respective property, and it will take you into the trust. So you can actually have a look at that and see what is showing on that particular one. So I can obviously come in, view the ledger, see what's there, follow up anything that I want to follow up on that particular one. Now, with your trial balances and various bits and pieces, they obviously live in under here. One of the key differences here with the trial balance is when you select your trust account in here, and if I refresh it, one of the key differences in here is the default is to show you a combined trial balance with all the transactions. So that's deposits as well as advertising. But if you want to run separate ones, you can obviously just change that default to say, give me only the deposits. And obviously it will show you all of the properties and just those where you're holding deposits versus the advertising trial balance. So you still have the ability to do those as completely separate trial balances, and you've obviously got the combined one as well. And for those of you who might have IBDs, you will also see this sitting at the bottom of the respective trust accounts where applicable. So that's where those will sit. Okay, now your advertising piece, which lives in here, which it will be related to sales trust for those of you who have got your advertising money going into the trust where you're holding it up front. You've got some additional reports in here. You've got your schedulers, your agent advertising. You can do your invoice lookups. You can view your advertising debits and credits. And like all parts of the system, this will allow you to see the trust and your advertising in the system there. And where you've got your view advertising transactions, this is where you can also come in and you can add in your creditor invoice details straight into the advertising ledger. So whereas in the past you would have to go into each property, potentially note the advertising invoice that you've received, now you can actually come in and you can do this in the one screen. So I can just flick through and I can, for example, come in here and I can pop in the invoice details from my cleaning company. So I'll just go here, it's clean 1256 is my invoice on that. And then that just allows me to note it in this one screen. I can obviously go through and find all my other cleaning ones, add those in, and then it's updating my advertising ledger straight away from this one screen. You can see here, I can obviously pull it by supplier, once again by status, by agent, and I can sort it on various things depending on what it is that I'm wanting to do in the system. So that all lives under the financial section. Everything to do with the trust and the advertising lives in that space there. Right, now for the exciting piece, or the less boring piece, if you like. So if I come into property in here, we've got, I'm just going to choose my Avocado Lane one for instances. So a couple of key things you'll notice here when we're coming into the property, straight away it's telling me who the owner of the property is, if it was tenanted, if there was a purchaser on it. So if I come in here, I'll just choose a different property, sorry, just to give you a different view on this. And you'll see here, I'm using the search up here, and that is just simply because it's much quicker than using the find and filter down on the left-hand side, but you can obviously use that function as well. So if I look at this particular property, you can see here I've got 2 owners, 2 purchases on it. It's an extreme case. I know it's one we use for training. I can see it is currently with our property management team as a management, and it's also a sale that is currently unconditional. So that is something to remember, is that the property can be 2 different statuses at the same time now in Vault. So there should be less need to clone and duplicate property. But in this instance, I'm going to come into my sale property. I've obviously got all the details here. I can see the different statuses here. Now, early release relates to our offices in Victoria. So for anyone who's not from Victoria, don't stress out. You shouldn't see that button. In fact, you won't see that button. So that pertains to there. And obviously the green is the next status it's expecting to happen with this particular property. So this property is already unconditional. If it wasn't yet unconditional, obviously I'd have a button here just prompting me to go make it unconditional. If I want to check any of the sale details, I can obviously click on the modify sale details. That will show me the details that are currently in on this property. And if I need to change anything, I can actually do it at this point in time. But what I'm going to do in this instance is I'm going to come to the financials, and this will bring me into this space here. Now I'm just going to get rid of my sticky note here for a moment, and I'm just going to remove that. Now the sticky note here is just this little pin on the right-hand side when you're in this section. And it is intended to be exactly as you saw there. It's like a little post-it note. So it's something that you may need to remember to do at settlement on the property or as part of the processing of the sale. It's not necessarily something that you're going to have an official note put in against the property record. It's more of a reminder. So this is where I can pop in here, remember to chase invoice for so I can pop that in there. That then remains in there, and what you will have seen there is if I click out into a different tab, when I come back into the advertising section or back into the general, is what it will do is it will pop that, I didn't say that. It would pop it back in there for me, and then I would see that little pop-up come back so I don't forget it. Oh, I did pop it in there. I did save it. Sorry, I was doubting myself. So there's my little pop-up, and it's just something that I need to remember to do. So when I'm at settlement, I can go, oh yeah, that's right, I need to take that there. I do that as part of the thing. Once I've finished with it, I can then just bin it and go, yep, I've done that. I don't need it there anymore, and I can take it away. Now you can add multiple post-it notes or sticky notes. There's no restriction on the number, and you can obviously click and drag them around once you're in the screen where you're viewing them. Now, receipting, disbursing, all of your standard bits and pieces will be sitting in here in this space. And they also live in under the trust ledger, but you don't actually have to go into the trust ledger to do those pieces. So where you're coming in, if you've got the permissions to the sales trust piece, it's going to give you those buttons right down the bottom here in the first instance, so you can get going straight away. Now, the real works is obviously dependent on which state and which contract integration you're using. So that can be REI forms in some of the states, it's real works, and in some of the other states it will be a different platform as well. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to receipt some money. So essentially what it's going to do is it's going to come in, it's going to say, what is the date? Same as we had before. Is it advertising? Is it a deposit? You're going to choose. And what you're going to do here is you're obviously going to link it to an advertising invoice if it's applicable. And you'll see here it's automatically going to apply the credit on the advertising ledger. Now, let's just say I'm an office where I'm not using the advertising at all. I'm doing that in another platform. I've got a spreadsheet, or I don't know, I'm tracking it some other other way, but we're still putting the money in the trust. In that instance, I'd go, I don't want to create the advertising ledger credit because we're not using that item, that part of the database. So in that instance, if that was applicable for you, you would just simply untick it. But for the majority of our offices where they are using the advertising module, they'll obviously leave that pre-ticked, and the system is automatically going to create that credit in the advertising ledger for me. In this instance, for training purposes, I'm not going to link it to an advertising invoice. And if this was the very first invoice that, sorry, not invoice, the very first receipt I was issuing, this is where the system will prompt me to say, which trust account are you depositing money into? And then I would select that, and then that would be the trust account that is being used for this particular transaction moving forward. So we don't have the ability to flick between trust accounts on the one property transaction. So it is important that where you have multiple trusts, that you obviously, we would normally set it up so you have your primary one as the main one that is sitting there on display, and then obviously the second and third or fourth, if that's applicable, would be in the drop down list for you to select. Who's the money coming from, the owner or someone other than the owner? And this is where, for those of you who are receiving money from campaign agent, etc., this is where you would just simply say the money has come into the trust account. It's not come from the owner, it's come from campaign agent, for argument's sake. If I can type that correctly. And then obviously I would put in the funds that they've paid us. And then I'd put, you know, details. And then I'd save it. The deductions around the franchise fees, etc., are all on the agent deductions and agent allocations. So we're not going to touch on that today because we cover that piece off in the actual sales processing module, Denise. So I'm happy to give you a buzz direct after the session on that. But in this instance, we're just doing the key sales trust pieces. So as you can see there with the receipt, I've just simply added that in, receipted it, and on that particular one, I'll actually now see, because I said apply it to the advertising ledger, you'll see here it's automatically popped that in here, and I can see that now sitting in on the advertising ledger. Now, when you're wanting to update your invoices, if I wanted to create an invoice for you, you'll see here I can create it, assign it to a new invoice. Obviously my pretend one here, we've got lots of different ones, but this is where your invoice footers will come into play here. So it's actually saying to you, which invoice footer are you wanting to apply to this one that you're creating? So if you've got a number here, obviously you would choose which one it is that you're wanting to apply for the particular invoice that you're creating. And as I said, that's primarily used for our offices where they've got cross-border transactions, and some transactions will be in the different state trust accounts. Okay, so I'm going to come back to the trust ledger here. So pretty much this section is very similar to what we had in my desktop. We've got the receipting of the money. A couple of the differences here when we're obviously saying a deposit is it'll say, is it from the purchaser? We've obviously got two here, or is it from other? We're obviously just popping in the details and we're putting in the notes and bits and pieces. Same thing here when we disperse funds. We've got here the dispersal. Is it advertising? Is it a deposit? Is it a payout? So you'll see here there's some standard options here where it knows exactly what it is based on what you're selecting. Now, for those of you who have already migrated and where you're paying advertising monies to your general account, but where you have not had that advertising money up front. So essentially you're deducting the advertising money from the deposit that's been held as per the instructions from the vendor. It is really important in that instance that you are dispersing the money from the deposit and you're not choosing advertising. You only use dispersed monies and advertising where you've actually received the money and receipted it as advertising money in the first instance. If you use advertising and haven't receipted that, in the first instance, what you'll do is you'll end up with negative balances in your advertising trial balance, and that's because essentially you're saying you paid out money from advertising, but you never received it in the first instance. So it's really important that where it's advertising money that's been deducted from the deposit, that you're actually choosing the deposit option here. And what you will be potentially be doing, in my instance, I'm just going to say we're taking out the advertising, so we're going to pay it to our general account that we've got set up for advertising. And what I'm going to pop in here is I'm just going to say $500 for purposes. What I will always do here in the reference is I'll put in here advertising, and then I'll just put in here and then I'm just going to save that. Now, the reason we do it that way is what you will see here on your ledger is I will see it, where have I put it, as a transaction which is showing as advertising here, but I can see it's come out of the deposit that we were holding. So it's automatically put in my BSB details, etc., because it knows exactly what they are based on the general account that I chose. So it's pre-populating all of these for you. Now, if you're wanting to print your ledgers, which most of you probably will at the stage when you would print those off to show all the money in, all the money out, you're back to a zero balance. When you do your print ledger in here, typically what it will do is it may not look as nice as this one I've got on the screen, and that's because I've actually changed mine to display nicely. So when you print these, the trick to have it so it prints on one page as opposed to sitting over multiple pages is where you've got your more settings. So you'll see here, this one here on the left-hand side is scrolling over a number of pages. Now, we don't want to have like, you know, squillion pages in it. So what we do here is we normally scale it down and make it 60%. Now, what that will do is it will scale it onto a one page. So the 60% just makes it a one-page ledger as opposed to what you saw there previously was a two-page ledger, and just means that if you're having to save this to a PDF file, it obviously prints. If you have hard copy print it, it'll obviously print looking nicer as well, but it's also a little bit more legible for you to be able to read. So that's just the little trick on that one there. So 60, scale it to 60 and it will print as a lovely standard sort of normal screen. Now, I'm just going to hope that I don't kill off the wrong screen here. Oh, that's good. Sorry, I killed off the wrong screen last time when I was doing this. So I'll close that one there. So that's just where you've got your ledger. Now, on this one here, I'm just going to touch on the payout wizard. Now, the payout wizard is so that where you have got and mine is obviously a fictitious property, so typically you can't use this if you've done any payouts prior to settlement. So it's intended for what I would describe as a vanilla transaction. Essentially, you've got a deposit, you might have VPA up front, you've done no payments prior to the settlement piece being done, it's all money coming in, and now you're obviously doing a payout. Now, what the system is going to do is it's going to look at your ledger and it's going to say, no, based on what you've got, I know how much the commission is, I know what the marketing spend is, and what it's going to do is it's going to show you the transactions it's going to create for you automatically. So all this is doing is the disburse monies steps for you as one process. So instead of you going in and going disburse monies for the advertising, save, disburse monies for the commission, save, the system is doing this as one window for you. So it's going, here's the summary, if it's right, go perform payout now, and essentially it will go and do those transactions automatically for you. So it is available to use if you want to. Otherwise, I'm a bit old school. I like to do the Disburse Monies manually, so I can just make sure that everything is right, that I've got all the right details, etc. So this is where I can go disperse the advertising, disperse the deposit, who am I paying, how much am I paying, and I can obviously put the details and bits and pieces in here. So that's where that lives. So same options, all doing exactly the same thing. It's just that it's got them as separate buttons. Now you'll see here payout commission obviously is always the last transaction you do. Now in some of our states that's actually legislated. So for any of the Queensland offices or any staff from the Queensland offices are on, please remember that Queensland legislation actually is noted that you must pay your commission as the last transaction on each transaction. And we have had a couple of offices where auditors have noted that they're paying themselves and then obviously paying the other parties as second and third. So just for Queensland particularly, make sure that you always do your commission transaction as the last transaction, which obviously will bring your deposits back to a zero balance. You've got your prepare sale instruction, same sort of thing. Obviously it does that. It's just going to give you the breakdown. You can print that. This one here is, it's not really intended to be a pro forma statement, although some offices are using it as that. But keep in mind it doesn't have any invoicing details or anything like that on it. So that is typically where you're going to use your letters and you're going to go in and choose the invoice either from your cloud letters, or if you're using your Word documents, if it's things that you're sending to solicitors, because typically a lot of solicitors still like to get things as attachments rather than inline emails. This is where I'm simply chopping between the two to tell it which one it is that I'm wanting to use. So if it was a Word document that I'm wanting to use, and I'm wanting to use, I don't know, my sales advice, or my unconditional sale, you know, depending on what it is that I've got my solicitor's letters down here. I can obviously click on that and I can just go, yep, that's the one I want, and away it will go, and it will pick up obviously the letter and it will merge that document into the letter for me, and then obviously I can download it and print it and do whatever I want to do. So this is just simply flicking between the two different letter types sitting in here. Now I did have a question the other day from someone who said, I really like the generic letter that's there, but I want to give it a flavour that relates to our office and our state. Now keep in mind that all your documents are living here, but if you want to go in and customise any of those generic letters and put your own spin on the cloud letter, where you do that from is the left-hand side here under your letters and action lists. And this is where under your various, if I come into solicitor letters, this is where you'll have your different letters sitting in here. Oh, we've only got one here at the moment. And I can obviously click on that one here, and this is where I can take a copy of it and then I can edit that copy and resave it as my own version. Now the left-hand side here where I came in to get that letter is also where you control who has the ability to see those letters, edit those letters, and which folder are you keeping those letters in here. So for those of you who've migrated, you're not going to see all of these different folders. These are obviously, a lot of these are ones that we've created for training purposes, so you'll have a much smaller set of folders, but you can obviously create your own folders as to where you want to keep bits and pieces. So that all lives in there. So I'm just going to come back to my property here that I've got. Let me just pick this one. Sorry, I whizzed out there. I'll come back in. Now, the letters and the documents also ties in here to your filing cabinet. Now, the filing cabinet here relates to each transaction that we do on this particular property. So you'll see here as a default, we've got our different folders set up. So as I want to save invoices or any documentation around this particular sale, I can pop it into the relevant folder here. What you'll also see here is I've got the current life transaction that I'm working on, but I also have the ability to come in here and see any of the past transaction or past folders linked to past transactions we've had on this particular property. So I can go back and review past contracts, past, you know, solicitors' letters or whatever it is that I might have had saved, and that all relates to the little drop down here. So the default is always to look at the current, but you will have the ability to look at past transactions if they're on your database. Same logic applies in relation to our trust ledger. So you'll see here it's defaulting to the current, but I can come in here and look at the past ledgers that are on this particular property, and then obviously I will see everything to do with the past ledgers. So when you close the property off, it wraps everything to do with that transaction up as part of that life, and then it sits there and it essentially is archived, for want of an easy way to describe it, in the database there. So we've got IBDs that are sitting on the right-hand side. So for any of you who use the IBDs, obviously this is where you'll come in, you'll create your IBD account, and we have exactly the same logic in place. You can either say the money has gone straight into the IBD or it was in the trust and you've moved it across into the IBD. So all of those pieces will live in that same space that we've got there. Now, while we're in this section here, we have got our bank details. Now, this is something which you will probably use more rather than less once you move to Vault. So especially for those of you who are using the ABA file option, this is where I can see at a glance all of the people that are involved on this particular transaction. I can see all of the solicitors, I can see the purchasers, the vendors, I can see exactly the details that I've got in for each individual. So when I'm doing bits and pieces through here, I don't have to go out, open up the contact card for Mary, add in the bank details for her, and then do the same for, you know, Therese that we've got here and the purchase, etc. I can do all of that straight here from that one bank details screen. So let's just say I've now got the bank details for Brian and they haven't been entered in, no one else has entered them in. So what I can actually do here is I can pop that in. I can tab through with the BSB. It tells me the bank, the branch, where it's located, and then obviously I can put in the details for my client and their account name. Now, it is really important with account names, and I know this sounds a really sort of picky little thing, but that you actually have exactly the same name in your system here as what the client has given you. So the reason I say that is it just means that if you've got funds that for whatever reason have gone to the wrong account or have the wrong details on it, essentially if you've got in there that the name is B. Brian W. Chesson and the account name is only B. Chesson at the bank, it just delays the whole process when banks are trying to match things back, because I go, oh, hang on, we've got a different details here, we've got it set up. So it is quite important that you have the name correct. This is also used with these bank account details, and also name details are also now used in audit purposes to make sure that officers are complying with the Anti-Money Laundering Act, so that you're actually displaying the name of the account that you paid the funds to, the bank account number, BSB, etc., the branch, etc., so that if, for example, they see in the trust account you paid, you know, X amount of dollars to B. Chesson at the Westpac, but then in your general account, for whatever reason, they're doing an audit cross-reference on that, they go, oh, hang on, you didn't pay a B. Chesson at the Westpac, you paid a B. Chesson and Mary Poppins at NAB. So is this the same person? What is happening here for you? So it's all to do with the audit trail and having visibility of where the money is going. So it's really important that the BSB numbers are being put in here, so that one, you don't have to manually put them in on each and every transaction, and two, so it's creating the appropriate audit trail for you. Now, just coming on to the ABA file option, where that is set up is under the financial piece here, under the setup and configuration, and on the edit option here. So this is where you'll obviously have the details of your trust account up the top here, and then down here is where you'll put in the details around your ABA file settings. Now this does migrate in part from my desktop, but it is really important that you come in and check and make sure it's pulled across all the bits and pieces into the right area, because there are additional fields in Vault that were not in my desktop. For those of you who don't currently use the ABA file option, you will need to get your APCA user ID number from your bank. It's not a number you can make up. It is one that they will provide you with, and you'll obviously enter that in here. And the other piece that you do need to ask your financial institution is, when you're sending the ABA file, does it need to have a self-balancing transaction in the file? So it's either a yes or a no. So this is either going to be ticked or not ticked. So it's one of those, and then you go save. Once you've created that there, and if you're setting this up for the very first time, when you go to run your ABA file from here, the very first time you go to run it, the system is going to prompt you and say, when do you want to start creating the ABA file from? Now, the reason it does that is if you've only just set it up and you've already processed a whole lot of EFT transactions yesterday, which you've manually processed through your bank, you don't want those transactions included in the ABA file that you're going to create. So giving it the start date tells the system at which point do I need to start bringing those transactions through to include them in the ABA file that we're creating. So you'll see here, we've got one here that's partially made, that we've created earlier, and you can see the transactions in here. It will clearly show you which ones you don't have details for, which obviously are not going to be able to be included because they're not going to be able to be processed. And then the other ones that it believes it is going to be able to pay out because it has the transactions and the relevant details that it needs to. And then obviously it's showing you the total. You'll obviously scroll through that, go, yep, they're all correct. And then you're going to generate the file, save the file, and then you're obviously going to send that file off to the bank and they're going to process it. So this is literally how easy it is to do the ABA file. So you'll process this every day or every second day, whatever your timing is on that piece, and then you obviously send that through. You can always come into your previous files. Let's just change this back a couple of days. Let's make it the 1st of June, refresh it, and I can see all of the previous ABA files that I've created. I have the ability to do my print friendly, which allows me to essentially come in and print off a list of all the ABA transactions that were included in there, showing exactly where they were going, what they were for, which bank and branch, etc. We've obviously paid those into, so they all live in there. And where applicable, which I don't think we had any in that one, we've got the remittance advice, and you can see I've got no creditors in that particular one, but that's where it will give me a remittance advice, which I can then send to clients as well, which will show the details of the payment that we've made and the bank account details that we popped it into. So that all sits in here. We do have the ability to reverse the ABA file if we've created it and then realised that it was horrendously wrong, it was a major mistake. Obviously we can reverse that and it will pop it back in there. So that's where our ABA file piece lives. And we do definitely find that where offices are using that, we have a lot less errors that occur in the sales trust, just with respect to payments going to the wrong place for the wrong amount, that sort of thing, numbers getting transposed, because there's obviously that check in place in the database. Okay, so that is probably all I'm going to go through on the trust account today.